Hey folks, I'm Mark Ryan. This is Super Review, and this is the Aful Performer 5 Plus 2, or if you know how to do math, it's the Performer 7. But they're not calling it that because, well, if you recall, a couple of years ago, Aful came out with the original Performer 5. It was their mid-tier, mid-priced, around $220 hybrid IEM that had a single dynamic driver, 4 balanced armatures, hence the number 5. Well, here with the Plus 2, they've added 2 dynamic drivers, or just 2 drivers to that mix. So now they've got 2 dynamic drivers, still 4 balanced armatures, as well as 1 micro planar for, I think, the treble. So this is moved on. It's different from what it used to be, but I don't know, similar price range, right? The original was $220. This one, they haven't actually announced the price yet as of the point that I'm recording this, but my understanding is that it should be around $240, $250 or something like that. And I guess what kind of my question was going into this is, 2 years on, is there still a place for a hybrid IEM of this price range? Cheaper hybrids have gotten good and more expensive stuff has gotten really good. Does it still make sense to have a $250-ish hybrid like the Performer 5? And so for the past few weeks, I've been living with and listening to this IEM, comparing it with some other sets that I've got, and I'm ready to let you know what I think. Before we do that, a quick shout out to Hi-Fi Go for sending in the Performer 5 Plus 2 for review. If you want to check them out, I've got them linked in the description down below. And additionally, they want to give away another set of the Performer 5 Plus 2. If you're watching this now and you want a set of this IEM, you can enter to win. Just leave a comment down below. I was going to say in the description. Leave a comment down below. Don't edit my description. Don't do that. But just subscribe to the channel. Leave a comment and say something like what it is that you're listening to now. This is for me, but also for them. What is it that you're listening to now, and what is it that you hope the Performer 5 Plus 2 improves upon what you're listening to now? That's what I want to know. And you do that. You leave that comment. Hi-Fi Go will handle the giveaway. It's not what I'm doing, but if you want a chance to win, they're doing that. But anyway, with that out of the way, let's dive to the table. We'll talk about, that's not the table. Let's go to the table. Talk about what you get inside the box, physical form factor, all that good stuff. And then we'll get into talking about the sound signature on this IEM, what it sounds like to my ear, and then bring in a couple of other IEMs for comparison before I wrap it up with a score. So what do you get with the Aful Performer? First of all, here is the box. Handsome little box. And what you get inside is a decent spread for around $250, but fairly basic, but I don't know, they've gone above and beyond a little ways. So let's put the IEM to the side for a minute and just highlight that this IEM comes with 3 different sets of silicone ear tips. They're not drastically different. I don't know if they intend for you to just pick these based on aesthetics. There are some slight differences, like this ear tip is the grippiest of the bunch, but maybe has the hardest core, whereas they all kind of have the same hard core. I don't know. I'm not totally sure exactly. Like shape-wise, they feel like they're exactly the same. So maybe you're just making the decision based on what you like. And this is actually, just wanted to pull this up, kind of a nice way to present them. They all come in this little punched out foam board, which I appreciate. Dig that. In addition to that, you get this little puck carrying case. And frankly, this is one of my favorite types of carrying cases that IEMs can come with. It's not like the fanciest or the plushest, but it's really pragmatic and functional. Like this will actually slide into a pocket pretty easily, and it holds your IEMs nice and secure. It's got a semi-hard shell. I think it is still a plastic shell, but it's nice. And then it spins quite well. Look at that. All right. We dig that. All right, apart from that, let's put that stuff to the side and talk about the build quality on the IEM itself, as well as the cable. In fact, we'll start with the cable, which is in typical Aful fashion, quite a nice cable. Behavior on it is quite good. You can see that this is actually a little bit softer maybe than their cables tend to be, or at least the ones that I'm thinking of. So yeah, it's just got like a nice drape to it. It behaves well. It's kind of the right balance of thickness versus being too heavyweight. I think that, yeah, they kind of just nailed that. The one possible downside of it being a little bit softer than average is you might notice, and you probably won't, but it does seem to be a little bit more prone to just kind of like kinking and showing some unevenness in the braid, right? That's the sort of thing that you can kind of work out just by doing that from time to time. But if you're particular about the tightness of your braid, this is a little bit on the loose end, which just contributes to it being softer, but because of that, it can also, show some looseness in there. As far as the hardware, we've got a nice small Y split here, really small. I dig that. We've got a chin cinch that actually stays in place Thank you. And then we've got your standard preformed ear hooks up top, and your standard 2-pin connectors. Now, the one thing I will highlight quickly about these preformed ear hooks is that they are a little bit on the large side, and this is one that I have not yet stanced, which is to say, maybe I'll do a video on how I do this sometimes, but a lot of times I'll use like a hair dryer to change the curvature. The way that this is curved right now, it's just a little bit straight down here, and just for me aesthetically, I don't like it. So I like to fix that kind of stuff with a hair dryer. I haven't done it with this cable yet because, well, you might have noticed that this one comes with a 4.4 mil connection. Now you can obviously get this with a 3.5. You're not destined to get a 4.4. This is just what they happen to send me for review. And because of that, I ended up using another cable. But this is otherwise still, again, a quite nice cable. We'll give it the old roadie wrap so you can take a look at what it wraps like. Just note that I have not yet stanced the hooks. And it would actually be even a little bit tidier if I curved those my ideal way. But anyway, that will lead us into talking about the earpieces themselves. And as I mentioned that, let's punch in on these guys. Aesthetically, I don't love the way that this thing looks, but there is something interesting going on. Like the pattern here, I don't know what it is that I don't love about it. I think I liked the way that the Performer 5 looked a little bit better, the original Performer 5. It looked kind of molten lava. It did kind of look like a knockoff of the The Audio Monarch Mark II. And this one avoids that issue, I suppose. But I don't know. There's something about the pattern I just don't love as much as, I guess, that other one. What is kind of cool, what I do like that they're doing here, and it's not going to be obvious to you watching this, but under different light, these things appear slightly different colors. Initially, I thought it was like a heat thing. Like as I was using them, they're heating up and changing. Like there's some things that do that. But no, it's actually just different types of light. And it's not even like the color of light. It seems like maybe even the light sources. So if I run this under my desk lamp, it's going to look more blue. Whereas here under this lighting, you can see it looks more bluish green. So basically just kind of like goes between looking green and looking blue depending on the light, and I think that is a cool effect. I like that. It kind of just adds like an extra bit of depth to it. I do just wish that maybe the pattern was, I don't know, it looks fine. It looks fine. It doesn't look bad, but it's not my favorite pattern. I'm kind of curious in the comments, what do you think about the design pattern on this guy? But apart from that, you have your fairly standard resin custom molded shell, and Aful typically does really nice fitting IEMs, and this is really no exception. Let me take off the ear tip to show you. The nozzle on this thing is, fairly small and compact. It does stick out a fair bit, I suppose, but unlike some other IEMs that have wider nozzles, this one's fairly narrow. You can see that they're still not doing anything to cover up the openings and the filters and stuff on the outside. I'm personally not worried about that. I know some people are. I wouldn't be too worried about it, but maybe, if you're used to your IEM having a replaceable filter on the outside, just note that this is a little bit more vulnerable to ear gunk getting inside of it. That white filter that you see down there with the metal ring around it, that should be replaceable. Like you can find replacements online, but I'm not sure if the other ones have filters in there that are just darker than I can see, or if they're not filtered at all. Regardless, I would just say be a little bit careful with it. But again, it's not something I'm personally concerned about. The one thing to note is that because this is kind of just like a straight plastic nozzle, there is no lip on it to grab hold of the ear tip. Now, I personally didn't have any issues with that, but I know some people have had issues with ear tips falling off of IEMs in the past. So just note there's no lip on there. So you are reliant on sort of a friction grip right there. And this ear tip that I'm using, this is a Soft Ears Ultra Clear. It's got nice grippy texture to it, so it works pretty well. And the reason I picked it isn't actually because of that extra grippiness. It's just in rolling tips on this IEM, this is the one that happened to fit me the best. And that's one thing I'll talk about. I guess we're getting to talking about the fit right now, is that while this is a semi-custom molded IEM and like Aful stuff, it generally fits pretty well. It does fit a little bit on the large side. I'm going to describe this as kind of like a medium large. So let me plug this into my ear as I describe it. So there you go. Take a look at it inside my ear. Yeah, I would describe this as like a medium large on the small side of medium large, which is, we're getting really nitty gritty. But basically, yeah, it's got those folds in it. So, it sits behind the antitragus, sits behind my little ear fold up here. And because of that, fit stability is super excellent. The only thing that I had issues with, and again, that's why I was playing around with tips a little bit, is that the angle of the nozzle in combination with how far back this lip is just made it a little bit long front to back from the nozzle to the back of the IEM. So it's not so much long front to back here. It's more when you count, count also the nozzle length on there. But in the end, after, finding the right tip that worked well for me, a very good fitting IEM. This is the kind of IEM that I slept with, just to give you a sense of like how comfortable it was. I mean, I sleep with most IEMs, but this is the type of fit that I slept with, and I woke up in the morning and the IEM was still in my ear. Whereas that's not always necessarily the case. Okay, so that is about as much as I can say about the physical form factor on this IEM. Hold on, let me check, make sure. Nope, I'm good. All I can say about the physical form factor. So let's talk about the sound here on the Aful Performer 5+2. And like I have been doing, we're going to jump over to Squiggling to take a look at the frequency response. If you want to take a look at this for yourself, I've got it linked on Squiggling in the description down below. But for now, let's just use our fingers and analyze together. So yeah, this frequency response is not too different from what you would have gotten on the original Performer 5. So if you were familiar with the Performer 5 sound and you're wondering what's different about this, it's not drastically different, but it is mildly different. We'll get into those differences more when I talk about my subjective listening impressions. But what to expect from the sound signature is generally kind of the same sort of thing, which is a clean mid-range. You've definitely got a bass boost to it. So it's a bass boost with the clean mid-range. And that's not a thing you always get. If you're new to the audio hobby, a lot of the times if you want a bass boost, a lot of bass boosted IEMs and headphones just have muddy, soupy mid-range. But with this type of frequency response, you avoid that. You get a nice clean mid-range, and you can see that up here it's tuned well, fairly in line with the target. The one slight deviation here versus like my neutral target, and this is where I would say that the sound's a little bit different than neutral, is right here, which is, might not look significant, but this is pretty significant. This is basically a little boost in the lower treble region. And where this is at is kind of where I call this like the presence region, where it can add a little bit of edginess to vocals. It can add just a little bit of extra definition and transient bite to a lot of things, like guitar strums, even like drum thwacks and stuff like that can get a little bit of a boost in the transient attack by having a little bit of an excessive boost here. And I think this, in combination with the boosted bass, means that this is, while a very clean mid-range sound, I would still kind of describe as like a mild V-shaped sound signature. All right, this is an exciting, engaging sound signature rather than just like a neutral, laid back, warm sound signature, right? So that would be kind of the contrast that I would leave you with. And then you can see that the upper treble is quite well extended. So that's generally what you should expect from an IEM like the Performer 5+2. But what does it actually sound like to my ear? I'm just pulling up my notes. Let's start actually just by talking about it versus the original Performer 5. And I'm going to caveat this big time right now. I haven't heard the original Performer 5 in over a year. So this is based on my listening notes that I take down. This is based on what I put in my short review that I did of the Performer 5, and also just what I remember of the Performer 5. Versus this guy, I remember the original sounding a little bit thinner and smoother and a little more clinical, but also less engaging. Whereas the Performer 5+2 here, it just sounds like a little bit more aggressive, both in the bass and in the treble. And that just gives it kind of this stronger bite that makes it both more exciting, but also maybe a little bit riskier, a little bit less safe of a tune versus the original Performer 5. So if you have the context of the Performer 5, hopefully that helps. But I don't have the original on hand to do a direct comparison. So hopefully you got that. Versus, yeah, the original Performer 5, I just say that this is a contrastier sound. It's got kind of like a stronger sense of density to it. And just overall, it trades the smoothness of the original for just a bit more punchiness and engaginess here with the +2 model. Okay. And that is to say, yeah, I think that the treble is quite incisive on this thing. In fact, the bass is also pretty incisive. Like, it just means that when it hits, there's a clear delineation between on and off. It can maybe be a little bit over incisive, just a little bit. The treble has, what's the word that I want to say? It's not quite a graininess. There's a little bit of a grittiness. And if there's a difference between grain and grit, I'm riding that line. But yeah, the treble does have a little bit of an excessive texture, I suppose, in it. But overall, again, it leads itself or lends itself toward just sounding more incisive, more visceral versus the original. And as well versus, frankly, a lot of IEMs in this price range. The bass is, I think, pretty well defined, especially in the attack. Like this is a fun, exciting bass. I don't know how much of that has to do, and I would be curious, as someone who doesn't build IEMs, I would be curious from someone who does, how much of that has to do with the extra dynamic driver versus actually probably that different treble tuning is adding just a little bit of added snap on that attack, and it really just makes it sound nice and punchy. Again, the treble can be a little bit gritty, not so much like sharp and fatiguing, just has a bit of a timbral impact, which can also affect other parts of the frequency response and things that you're hearing. So like high frequency percussion, hi-hats, drum brushes, stuff like that, cymbals can sound just a little bit on the plasticky side on this set, but that was frankly also true of the Performer 5, and maybe it's just kind of true of a lot of IEMs in this price range. So I think that is going to bring us into comparing this IEM, and again, I wish I had the original Performer 5 for this comparison, but I don't. So I'm going to have to make this a little bit interesting. So here we've got the Aful Explorer. This is effectively the Performer 3. This one came out a few months ago. I reviewed it, quite like this one. And it's quite a bit cheaper than the Performer 5 Plus 2 because it's got only 3 drivers in it. 120 bucks, I believe, maybe 130 bucks, but definitely on the lower end, but still a hybrid driver IEM. And then over here, we've got the The Audio Oracle Mark III, which is quite a bit more expensive than the Performer 5 Plus 2 at around almost 600 bucks for this guy. And this one's a tribrid IEM, so it does have ESTs in there as well. So a little bit, actually this one's technically a tribrid too. So there you go. But the reason I bring this one in particular is, especially if you look at the frequency responses on SquigLink, again, link in the description if you want to check it out, these two have a very, very similar frequency response. In fact, these two have a lot of similarities, but some deviations, which I guess I'll get into. But I don't know, maybe through this sort of three IEMs, 3 different price ranges, kind of similar directions, you can triangulate what makes sense for you, and that's why I'm talking about these IEMs. All right, let's start with the comparison versus the Aful Explorer. Again, 120 bucks. Sound signature wise, the Explorer, not the Performer, is quite a bit warmer. It's like a denser, darker sound here. And you definitely, that's kind of the difference that you'll see in the frequency response, is that the Performer 5 Plus 2, it's just a brighter tune, like it's got more of that upper treble, as well as a slightly leaner mid-bass punch, whereas this has got a little bit more fullness in that mid-bass. I think the downside of that, well, yeah, I'll call this the downside, is that the Explorer can sound a little bit less spacious, whereas the Performer 5 does a really good job with separation, layering, and just that clear delineation between sounds. The Explorer can sound denser and more compact, and again, less of that sense of space if that's the thing that you're prioritizing. I would say that the Performer, I keep calling it the Performer 3, even though it's not called the Performer 3. Little branding suggestion there. Anyway, I would say that the Explorer does sound a little bit more unique in a way, just because it does have just, again, that density that's really well executed, especially at its price range. Whereas this is a sound signature that we're starting to see on a number of IEMs, including the Oracle Mark III. So yeah, there's that. I would say that also the Explorer is less incisive, but it actually has fewer issues with the treble timbre, whereas this one I said sounded a little bit plasticky. This one sounds more or less natural throughout, no matter what I'm listening to, right? High frequency percussion stuff sounds nice and natural in here, although it's definitely going to be coming across darker. So between these two, honestly, I kind of prefer the Explorer, but it's definitely trading off things, right? It just gives me like this, it's a more unique sound signature. I think frankly is why I personally gravitate toward the Explorer. Again, if you're going to look for the IEM that has the more technical sound, the Performer 5 Plus 2 is going to give you that for sure. And if you're going to look for the more engaging sound, the Performer 5 Plus 2 is probably that as well. But if you're looking for just the easier listen, or maybe just like you're looking for a warm, kind of bassy sound signature that's well executed, the Explorer really is that, and at a really good price. But that will bring me into comparing it here with the The Audio Oracle Mark III, which again, quite a bit more expensive, almost 3 times the price of this guy. And how would I describe these two? So while the frequency response is quite similar on the graph, as you'll see if you want to take a look for yourself, they actually sound noticeably different. In some ways, I prefer the Performer 5, and in some ways, I prefer the Oracle. The main differences is frankly just, I think it has a lot to do with the treble timbre. This just sounds more incisive, a little bit sharper in its pluck and its attack versus the Oracle, which has a softer, kind of more diffuse sound. I would say that the Oracle in general sounds like, it sounds a little bit bigger, I suppose, like, or maybe it just sounds deeper is probably the best way to describe it. So like when I talk about the way that I hear space in music, I usually hear things kind of laterally, left to right, which typically, you know, a tune like this does a really good job with the lateral left to right, right? A brighter tune is going to usually bring that out. And then I also describe things as depth, which usually is me describing like the levels of bass, frankly, and like how deep is it digging and how much is that playing with the rest of the frequency response. And, you know, in frequency response, this doesn't necessarily graph bassier, but it does give me more of that sense of depth to it. In combination with it being slightly less incisive, I think just gives it this more slightly diffuse, wider sound overall versus the Performer 5+2. But frankly, I'm kind of splitting hairs in that way. In a lot of ways, these things are pretty similar. They're both kind of like a slightly turned up neutral with sub bass boost. So they've got a little bit more extra excitement in that lower treble, give them a little bit of extra bite. Just the Oracle Mark III at triple the price is going to give you a slightly smoother response, whereas here with the Performer 5+2, you get a little bit more incisive, but also with the cost of it being a little bit gritty and plasticky in the treble timbre. The song that I'm thinking of for specifically is the Parcels live album, Games of Luck, or pretty much all of the tracks on that album, to be honest. But I think that's going to do it for my thoughts here on the Performer 5+2. Does this IEM have a place? Does it still make sense to have a $250-ish hybrid when you've got these other ones at your disposal? I think, yeah, the answer is yes. It depends on what you're looking for. If you're looking for the cleaner, more spacious sound signature, I think this is a really well done version of it. There is reason to spend a little bit extra on something like the Oracle Mark II. At least for my preferences, it's a little bit smoother overall, but again, there are some slight trade-offs that you might actually think are better here on the Performer 5+2. But if you're just looking for a hybrid IEM, you want some bass and you don't mind a slightly darker, denser sound, the Performer, not the Performer, the Explorer, Jeebus. That's one I still think is pretty special. This one I still think is really good. I'm still going to give the Performer 5+2 a solid 4 stars. If you want to check it out, I've got it linked in the description down below. And while you're down there, if you haven't already, please do hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, ding the YouTube bell, and leave a comment. If you want to win this IEM, leave a comment saying what it is that you're listening to right now and how do you think the Performer 5+2 is going to do better than that. That's what we want to know. But yeah, otherwise, I'll catch you on the next super review. Adieu.
Join with the force of reviews, we now have the tools to brave the misleading world of audio fools. Hey, this review is super, and so are you. Grab your headphones, sniff a graph, and share your thoughts in this pursuit.